Today's businesses are on a vigilant watch for threats in an ongoing cyber war. It's time to get real-world solutions to protect and secure your valuable business information anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Cybersecurity America.
Well, welcome to the show. Today is going to be on memory forensics. We're going to start off with debate. Got a great guest tonight for you. His name is Andrew Case. I've been knowing Andrew for, 15, 17 years, something like that, for a pretty long time. He has significant experience in incident response, digital forensics, malware analysis. He's a core developer of Volatility, probably one of the most widely used open source memory forensics frameworks around. He's also co-author of the highly popular and technical forensic analysis book, The Art of Memory Forensics, Detecting Malware and Threats in Windows, Linux, and Mac Memory. He's spoken at many industry conferences, including Black Hat, DEF CON, RSA B-Sides, as well as many others. Now, welcome to the show, Andrew. Now, did I miss anything on your background here? I know you're doing a lot, and I see you on LinkedIn. You got a lot going on, but how are you doing, sir? Welcome to the show.
It's going great. Thanks for having me. It's good to talk again after and recap some things after quite a while. But things have been fun. City has been in the news a bit with some very high profile breaches that we got to work and some incident response. And as we'll be talking about today, if you're not doing memory forensics when you're responding to those types of engagements, you basically miss all the malware. And so we've been getting to do quite a lot of very fun real world memory forensics in our cases. And then as we were talking about before, we have the big Volatility 3 release that just came out a few weeks ago. And so now we've been lined up at quite a few conferences to give talks and workshops and things because people really want to start using it in their own investigations as well.
Yeah, and it's like the gold standard in memory analysis is Volatility. It's been around for a while. It's tried and true. It's in a lot of incident response frameworks that people use and tool sets that they use. And I got to use version 2 myself, and I was quietly impressed on it. So part of this podcast, you and I were talking about, it's one thing to say, hey, we got this new tool, Volatility 3, that's coming out, go over some of the details of it. But how do we also turn this kind of into a learning session and learn memory forensics? How does that different than forensics on disk? What are some of the threat actors doing? So I asked if you put a few slides together, turn this into training in the beginning, talk about memory forensics, and then what are threat actors doing in the advanced memory analysis. Does that sound good, Andrew?
Yes, and I've pulled together 7, 8 slides that we've used quite a bit, but as you'll see, we like to update some of the references because interesting attacks and malware come out. But I'm going to share my screen so I can show the slide deck. I'm going to go over some of these slides. So as I mentioned before, this is some slides that we use often at the beginning of conferences where maybe we have an audience of people who don't do memory forensics every day, maybe haven't seen it a lot. And so this really, and also people who want to know why is memory forensics important, which is what we're talking about now. So the idea with memory forensics, as the listeners will hear quite a lot over this podcast episode, is with memory forensics, we are doing our analysis. So whether this is for incident response, for traditional digital forensics, anytime we're investigating an endpoint, when we're talking about memory forensics, it's the concept of acquiring a capture of RAM from that machine. So at a moment in time, or realistically, probably over 10 or 30 seconds, however long the capture takes to acquire, this is the exact state of that machine. So we're not turning the machine off and pulling the hard drive. We're getting RAM, which, as we'll talk about, really tells us every single detail of what was occurring on that system when we walked up to it. As Josh, as you mentioned before, this is often done in conjunction with disk and network forensics to complement each other. But given some of the realities in the world, how large hard drives are, how hard they can be to image things like certain Mac models or very complicated RAID setups, in many cases, we don't touch entire disk images. It's actually pretty rare at Volexity and some shops similar to us, like doing very cutting edge incident response. You normally don't get full disk images because these are not going to court anyway. You're not going to try to sue someone on the other side of the world. You just want to kick them out of your network and figure out what they were doing. So instead, what's done, there's this process or this technique known as select file acquisition. So the files on disk that really have the forensics artifacts you care about, the log files, the registries, and so on, we can pull those. And then network forensics is kind of the same way. It's very hard to do full PCAP, but things like NetFlow can be helpful. But Also, in many investigations, we just have memory samples. And as we'll talk about, that's going to allow us to do very deep investigations about what occurred on the system. The other thing we like to point out early, and this is in a lot of marketing material, and you'll see LinkedIn posts and blog posts about it, when so as Andrew Case or anyone else from Volatility or the Volatility team is talking about memory-only malware and the need to look in memory, this is not fileless malware. So it's in red. We like to call it out in the first slide. Fileless malware is the concept of malware that persists on the file system. So you can reboot that machine and the malware is coming back. The reason it's called fileless is because it doesn't create new files. So it writes itself into an existing shortcut file, or it writes itself into a registry hive that already exists. But with fileless malware, as I mentioned, you can reboot the machine and it comes back. Or you can take the hard drive image and do disk forensics and you can go find it. When we talk about memory-only malware today in these slides and the rest of the conversation, this is malware that does not survive reboots. So it's literally only in the memory of a victim process, or it's only in kernel memory. And when you reboot that machine, the malware goes away. That's obviously very stealthy and really drives the necessity of memory forensics. And then if you're a listener and you're wondering, what's the point of malware that doesn't survive reboots? There's a couple things to realize there. One is your critical servers very often have uptimes of weeks, months. On Linux systems, it can be longer than that. But even on Windows systems, let's say Patch Tuesday rolls around, your IT team says these patches are archaic in our environment, so you start pushing out the patches. Some of them require reboots, and then all the machines start rebooting, right? So you would think the attackers just lost their access. But if you look at how modern attacks work, how the toolkits the attackers use work, they're just reusing credentials. So if they were able to get on your machine in the first place, and then they load memory-only malware and the machine reboots, they're just going to use those same stolen credentials to access the machine again, get the malware loaded, and then we're back to square one. So there's really no need to persist if you are equipped with a tool set that meets really what modern attackers are using, what we're seeing in our engagements. So for the rest of the slides, the rest of the conversation today, when I say memory-only malware, or you see it on other slides, keep that in mind. This is never on the file system, and there's no way to find it unless you're doing memory forensics. When we talk about what can be recovered, we get this question a lot. So what's the point of memory forensics? What can we find in memory that's not on disk? Or why can't I take my favorite live forensics tool, a sysinternals or a similar tool, run that, get some volatile data, and then walk away from the machine? Why do I need something as large and as complicated as the back end of Volatility is? Well, if you look at this slide, this could be 100 slides of all the things we can find in memory, but this kind of points out why it's so important. If you look at the first 3 bullet points at what we can recover running processes, the list of active network connections, so which processes are talking to command and control servers, which processes are exfiltrating data, and so on. And then if we're concerned with rootkits, we can recover off the running system the list of kernel drivers. And then this is where people who are experienced with incident response will say, okay, why don't I just run sysinternals? Why don't I run some other tool to get this data? And the problem is when you look at malware and toolkits that are used in the wild, the first thing they do when they load on machines is hook all of the places that those live forensics tools use to operate. So then what you'll see is malware is running on a machine. It has a process that is 100% active, can do everything a process can do. But when you run your live forensics tools, the malware has control. So it's going to let you see all the running processes except for the malicious one. And it's going to let you see all of the network activity on that machine except for the malicious connections. And then you can just repeat that for everything that you can pull off the running system. With memory forensics, we win both ways. We're not dependent on the APIs that the machine has or that the operating system provides for us. We are taking that memory sample that's offline and we are recovering all those artifacts directly. So we're going to find processes that are hidden on the live machine, find network connections that are hidden on the live machine, and so on. And then secondly, memory forensics wins because we not only find all this hidden data, we also directly find the malware that's doing the hiding in the first place. And so now we can tell you, hey, this machine's infected, and oh yeah, it's hiding this process. This is exactly where you need to focus your investigation time. For the rest of these bullet points, and as I said, it could could be dozens and dozens more. These are things that are not accessible to live forensics tools. Remember, with live forensics tools, if the operating system doesn't provide an interface or an API to recover that data, your live forensics tool can't get it. Where with memory forensics, as long as it's in memory, which is really all the stuff we care about, then we're free to get it as long as we can write a plugin to recover it. So something that's very powerful is console input and output. If you have active attackers on the machine through command.exe or PowerShell is very common, we can not only recover what's typed into those consoles, but also all the output that was generated. It's basically like you're looking over the shoulder of the attackers as they are there. There's literally dozens of malware created artifacts in memory. Some of them are side effects of what the malware does. So even if there's anti-forensics techniques, they can't cover their tracks from these artifacts that are created. And then a big one, and this is very popular with law enforcement and insider threat investigations and things like that, is especially now, applications make a significant effort to encrypt what's on disk, right? So you have your chat logs, they're encrypted. You have your emails, those can be encrypted. If you do private browsing, something like your browsing history and your cookies and the set of files you downloaded, those aren't written to disk at all, or at least not in long-term storage. And it's the same thing on the network. We know at least the web traffic that we care about is encrypted so that if someone's snooping the network, they can't get the plain text. Memory doesn't have this problem at all. For example, you're looking at this PowerPoint slide that I made, and obviously it has text on it. If I were to turn my laptop off, the full disk encryption would protect this. And then if I was to separately put this in an encrypted container or some file formats like PDF support encryption natively, you're kind of out of luck at that point without trying to break the encryption. Where the idea to remember with memory forensics is if you can see it in plain text on your screen, so you wrote someone an email and you saw what you were typing, or they replied to the email and you can see their message, if you can see the picture, see the video, if it's plain text on your screen, it's plain text in memory. And so we have very focused analysis techniques to say, let me recover all the person's chat logs. Let me recover every URL they visited, even in private mode, even if they closed the browser. We can go back and get that very rich set of user activity that simply doesn't exist anywhere else in memory. And so if you're in a position listening to this and you're like, I don't really look at malware. My job is to make sure when we have insider threats that I can figure out, did this employee or did this contractor steal data, what was taken, and so on. Memory forensics is still a huge part of that. And then, as I said, law enforcement, we've heard many stories over the years, have many friends doing these types of investigations from the law enforcement side. They don't care at all about malware. They just want to use memory to get access to the data that proves what the person did. And so memory volatility can bring that as well. And then why does it matter? So as Josh mentioned, volatility has been around a very long time. I have myself and a few others on the volatility team spent well over a decade keeping the project going and everything up to date and doing the talk so people know that these capabilities are out there. And again, it's really because if you're not doing memory forensics, you are missing the most important data, or in some cases, all the data. The thing that drew me personally to memory forensics the most initially is that you really get the entire state of everything on the system. So a very simple example that we walk through when we do the workshops is, let's imagine I hand you a USB drive and it has a piece of malware on it. So we'll make it easy. It's a Windows executable. You double click that executable, your machine's infected, things are going to go bad. So what you can get from that executable, that static executable on the thumb drive, if I tell you to analyze it, you can use IDA Pro, you can use Ghidra, you can throw it in a sandbox, but all you're really getting at that point is a very broad set of what that malware is in general capable of. You basically have a malware report to say, this malware family or this malware strain can do X, Y, Z. Versus if you have a machine infected with that malware, and then you take it to do memory forensics, that is the exact state of the malware on that system. So at that point, you can say this malware was running, it injected its code into these processes, it had hooks on this data, so it was able to hide from the live machine, or it was stealing passwords as they were entered, or it was stealing browser data as it was generated, and so on. When you do memory forensics with malware, you know the 100% specifics of the environment you're investigating. You know exactly where the malware was placed, exactly what it was doing, and there's zero things to guess about. And as you could probably figure out with disk forensics, that's impossible, certainly not possible with network forensics either. And then another big thing that I haven't mentioned yet was the historical information. So a big problem with your live forensics tools or your live agents that run and then kind of on demand, they get the live state of the machine. So running processes, active network connections, and so on, is they're limited to what is happening at that exact moment. So let's say, which is actually pretty common, attackers will monitor machines that they're working on. And then if the IR team comes behind and they're really slow and they're fumbling around with tools, the attackers will start to clean up after themselves. So then by the time the live forensics tool runs, all of that activity is gone. Everything the attacker is doing has been removed from the machine. But that is just removing it from the file system. Versus when we have the memory capture, we still have that historical data there. We can figure out processes that were recently running, network connections that recently closed. We can carve executables out of memory. So let's say the attacker even had files on disk, and then they notice the IR team setting up a collection. They delete those files. It can be very hard to try to recover those from disk. It's luck at that point if it has been overwritten or not. Versus in memory, we can just go back and scrape it out. And so we have every advantage in the situation by doing memory forensics, where with this forensics, network forensics, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And then the final thing, as we'll cover over the next couple of slides with some reports that I would suggest everyone to read if you're listening to this, is modern malware, modern toolkits are memory only. So as I said, they don't persist on the disk. With this is one of my favorite reports I've ever read related to malware and just threat groups in general. So at the bottom, you see I have some red around a screenshot. This is a cutout of a report Microsoft did now 3 years ago about a group called Core Lump. So this was very interesting. This was essentially a mercenary hacking group operating out of Austria. So you could hire them to hack into whoever you wanted to target. They would use their exploits in their 0 days to get access. Like I said, if you haven't read this report, highly recommend reading it. It's a very good technical read. And what I've highlighted in red is part of the report where Microsoft's saying, hey, we were trying to help some of our customers who were targeted by this group. And all of the payloads that mattered, the ones that really infected the victim system, were memory only. And if you look at just a few of the ones I haven't read, the ability to do keystroke logging, capturing screenshots, exfiltrating files, remote shells, listening to the webcam, listening to the microphone, recording the web camera, all of those happen in a memory-only way and with memory-only payloads. And so it's Microsoft essentially saying you need to do memory forensics. This is how we were able to get it. So again, this report is a great read, one of my all-time favorites. The mercenary group that was targeting these people, Microsoft burned all of their capabilities, every piece of malware they had, every 0 day they had, and basically put them out of business and wrote a very technical report along the way. But it very much showed why memory forensics is critical. And then one that is very recent, so not even a month old at this point, another great group by the threat intel group at Google. They were talking about this APT41 and their innovative tactics. And the part that they were harping on the most and talking about the most was all of the memory-only payloads. And so getting code injected memory only, lots of process hollowing, which is where you start a process that seems legitimate. You can see it servicehost.exe in the quotes, but that is very much not the real servicehost.exe when it starts running. And the only way to detect process hollowing is with memory forensics. So again, another very good read on some very recent malware. Like I said, this report's not even 30 days old yet. We definitely recommend reading it. And it shows you just how far attackers go to really put the payloads that matter and what you're looking for in memory. And then one of the best pieces of evidence we have for how important memory forensics is, and it's generated a lot of interest towards volatility and people emailing us and so on, are the CISA emergency directives. So for people not familiar with this, people who don't work in the government directly or work with them, with the emergency directives, this is where CISA can say to the agencies that they're in charge of, which is many of them across the federal government, in agencies in certain states and so on. And what they're saying in their emergency directives is, hey, there's an ongoing attack or there's an ongoing breaches, vulnerabilities are being exploited. These are the steps you have to take if you're running the affected software, and you have to do these steps right away. And ever since the Exchange vulnerabilities that were found a couple of years ago and SolarWinds, which those were very heavily memory-only payloads and so on, every single CISA emergency directive now starts with what you're seeing on this slide. This is cutting directly from the first lines of the report, not page 10 or something. And the very first thing it says you have to do is forensically image system memory, which is essentially saying take a memory capture. And then it goes on to say you need to analyze that memory capture for signs of the malware. And what's also very interesting, if you look at the IOCs for a lot of these reports, they're IOCs where what you're looking for is only in memory. So you literally can't even do your IOC hunting, your threat hunting, if you can't look in memory, because those IOCs only exist in memory. And so with CISA basically saying memory, this has been a few years now, right? With CISA basically saying memory forensics is required to do effective response. Every agency needs to develop this capability. Volatility was already really popular, but it got even more popular after this because everyone wanted to know how to do it and incorporate it into their workflow. There's also another really cool document, and we were very, very happy when this came out. This was from the NCCIC. That acronym stands for a very long organization I'm not even going to try to say. But they have this document called, it's a fact sheet, so a little one-page printout that says, so you think you've been compromised or you've been compromised, what do you do? And they have the do's and the don'ts of incident response. And we love this because for years and years, we told people, hey, when you're compromised, do not just walk up to the machine and turn it off, or don't just walk up to the machine and disconnect the network. That seems intuitive, but you're blowing away all the volatile memory. When you do that, you need to take a memory sample first, and then you can do these other steps. And now we have CISA, where the very first two things they say during IR is don't turn the machine off, don't disconnect it from the network. Their other advice is also really good. So you'll have people who will run a memory forensics tool, but as it's running, or maybe before they get memory, they'll run an AV scan, or they'll load some other software on there to do scans. That is just messing up memory. You're taking what is a very pristine data set in memory to do IR on, and you're cluttering it with a bunch of nonsense. And then your investigators have to say, okay, was this activity the sysadmin or the IT person who didn't really know what they were doing, or was this actually the attacker? So CISA helps us out a lot here, right? And there's only two do's of incident response. The do's are capture memory, grab a disk image. Doesn't get much easier than that. And then you can see I have it highlighted in the red box as well from the same report. It says volatile memory is a gold mine of forensics data, and it often has information that's not on the hard drive or anywhere else, which pretty much sums up what we've been saying for 15 years now. You have to do memory forensics or you're not going to find what you want.
Real quick, Andrew, when you say do not immediately disconnect from network, but a lot of enterprises have EDRs and they put the machines in a quarantine. Is that impact memory forensics here?
No, that's actually okay. So if you have EDRs, so what you want to avoid is turning off the network card. So whether that is through a script that disconnects the adapter or literally walking up to the machine and pulling the Ethernet cable out the back, when you do that, it's very disruptive in memory. So normally with Volatility, you can run a plugin and get all the network activity like I was talking about before. You can figure out which processes were making connections, which processes had sockets open that could receive data across the internet. As soon as you disconnect the adapter, all of that goes away. And Volatility can't help you on it. To say it's not 100% can't, but the results will be much, much degraded versus otherwise. So if you have an EDR, that simply just reassigns it to, I'll call it like a virtual network, right? So it's technically still online, but it can't access the resources. Or other companies that we work with a lot, they have smart switches, right? So you can say that switch port can't talk to the internet or can't talk to internal resources, but you can still connect to it yourself to do IR and things like that. As long as the machine still thinks it's online, you're okay. It's when you start physically pulling out the Ethernet cable where things go bad.
And I think for some of those customers that don't have an EDR, what are they supposed to do if they have a ransomware attack? I understand if you want to preserve information, it's an insider threat or it's an intrusion. But if it's a threat to the network and it's ransomware, what do they do when they don't have an EDR? In those situations, does it make sense to pull a cable?
No, you always want to get memory first. There's actually CISA has another report called, it's like their hashtag stop ransomware or stop ransomware attacks. And they actually address that. And you don't need to do it potentially on every machine, but you need one machine where the malware is active to get a pristine data set. Because it's also, if you have think about it in like a real network and how fast ransomware can spread, unless you have some magic IR capability where like within a minute of say the ransomware getting there, it's on that machine, you're going to pull the plug, you're going to stop it from spreading. The idea that losing a pristine data set versus if you have your tool set up and your processes set up, you can do a memory collection plus select file acquisition in like 5 minutes or less, right? And if you already have ransomware spreading, is saving that one machine really going to save you? You're probably in a rough spot already, right? If you somehow magically know you're on patient zero machine, which is basically magic, you're not going to know that right away. Then maybe, but yeah, for people listening, it's a really good document. If you Google like CISA stop ransomware fact sheet or something like that, it goes through steps of like exactly what to do with ransomware. And even they say you need to get a good data set, right? Because you want to be able to generate IOCs, you want to be able to figure out what other machines are actually infected. And you can't do that if you start turning machines off. Yeah.
I think it's a big company we jumped into, and they had some outages. One of the biggest problems that we had was they had pulled the internet connections, and so we had no capability to actually jump in on the IR. We couldn't even give access to the EDR because the EDR was shut down. They didn't permit the ports for EDR to come in through the firewall. So their outage, while thinking that was a great response here because just pull the internet, was massively disruptive. And we had outside virtual machines, so we couldn't get in for extended time periods. So you can see where not having a proper containment strategy will really cause massive outages for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where tabletop exercises and actual live exercises of going through the steps and doing what you said, right? I mean, you can run programs that are benign, right? But act like ransomware. They're going to try to spread around the network, try to do certain things. And if people can even do just exercises talking through it, and then obviously hopefully they would come up with issues like you said. But if not, if people do live exercises where they're simulating this stuff, they're going to run into exactly what you said, right? They're going to try to remediate it and realize, hey, we can't even access it. Or if they're working with a third party, our third party team can't even get access, or we can't get updated definitions. We can't submit files to our EDR. So yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. Like people need to at least talk through this and try to think of everything that could go wrong. But if you're in a big enough organization, you really should be going through simulations as well. Either do it internally or there's plenty of third-party companies that will help you with these as well. But really walk through the whole thing, because that's the whole point too, right? Like, as I was mentioning before, if you're going to take 2 hours to get a collection and let ransomware spread, that's totally different than you are ready to get a collection. It's 3 or 4 minutes, you're done. Now you can disconnect the machine and you have your pristine data set. Those are two totally different things, but companies have to be prepared for it first and have things pre-deployed and practice and so on.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two types of tabletops, right? You have a tabletop where it's more of a business process. Like, who do you call? What meeting do we stand up? And what's our notification we send out? I mean, because we do tabletops as well. Then it's really with the IR guys. You come up with a simulated event, but they never take it to the point of actually trying to take that machine, quarantine it, do everything you would do in a live incident. They're like, let's just walk through it and talk about it.
Yeah.
But they don't actually shoot anything down or capture images or try to even for the restores for ransomware, we see where they don't even infrastructure to restore to. So you get all these backups, and if you had to restore the data to actually view, you're stuck. You'd have to wipe out production. It's a real mess in many cases. But one of the bullets you put there I thought was interesting. Do not run antivirus program, and I could see that's where natural response for a company, especially a low maturity company, would say, run antivirus. I don't see anything. We should be fine.
Yeah, and that's one of the worst things you can do, because a very powerful aspect of code and memory, of malware and memory, is it's their true form, right? So often, let's say you have malware that actually runs from disk, that executable on disk is going to be obfuscated, right? It's going to be compressed, encrypted, all these things. But when it loads into memory to actually perform its malicious activity, it's going to decrypt itself. So you're going to have those true IOCs that you can use in memory to find it. And that's a very powerful part of memory forensics. You take your big Yara rule set, you run it over the memory sample. And like I said, when you run Yara over disk, you're essentially running over like encrypted files, right? Versus in memory, you have the real data set. The problem is when you run antivirus, the first thing that antivirus is going to do is read its rule set on disk, which has the signatures of every piece of malware ever. And then you're going to go run your YAR rules on that and think the machine has a million pieces of malware on it, and it just throws everything apart. And so running AV is very, very disruptive. It's in the slides, but it also breaks disk forensics, right? So if this is something, I mean, you don't always know, right? Like imagine this is something you want to take to court later and you run AV first, and then you're trying to say, oh, well, this employee went rogue and they changed these files, accessed these files. Well, you can't even do that because your antivirus is going to change it for every single file it read on the file system. I mean, so whether you're doing IR like I really focus on, or whether you're in that more traditional digital forensics world where you have to do everything very correctly and have your chain of custody, running AV first just breaks everything. And it's very hard to know really what the root cause is first. Is it an attack? Is it an attacker on the other side of the world? Is it someone in the accounting department went rogue? So it's not a good practice really from any viewpoint to do that. You always want to get your data set first and then go from there.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, this we love this document. We had been preaching this for years and years, like during our trainings and workshops, what to do, what not to do. We would always get pushback on the network, on not disconnecting from the network, not turning off the system. And now it's just basically the industry standard finally says, very authoritative body says the steps that we've been talking about for a very long time. And then the last thing, as I mentioned before, we have our Volatility project. Volatility 2 has been around since about 2008. Kind of a beta version of it was shown at Black Hat 2007 in Vegas. So it's been around a while. It was and still is very popular. So thousands of organizations around the world use it for very important investigations ranging really anything, right? Insider threat, incident response, anything where memory will provide value. But as you might expect, when you design a memory forensics framework in 2007, 8, and 9, and your average machine has 1 gig of RAM and your average investigation's 1 or 2 systems, that's quite different from now. Machines have a bunch of RAM. We routinely investigate hundreds or thousands of systems when we're going through networks. So we wanted to start from scratch. And so Volatility 2 was deprecated about a couple months ago now, 2 months ago now. If you go to the GitHub project, it's archived, which means it's read only. So you can still see the code and such, but you can't actively use it. And it's been replaced with Volatility 3. So Volatility 3 is Python 3, still fully open source. You want to know how a plugin's detecting something or working, read the plugin. If you get stuck, if that doesn't help enough, we have a Slack where you can ask us whatever you want, like, hey, how are you detecting this malware? How are you detecting process hollowing and so on? One of the core developers or one of our community members can help you with that. So we have a lot of people new to memory forensics, a lot of college students doing cybersecurity. They want to learn the deep internals. Use Volatility. It's open source, and that's why the source code's there for you. Obviously, it helps in real investigations as well. And if you want to read all the details, I put the link to our blog post. So it has the link to the source code, link to some tutorials, link to documents, really get you up and running on Volatility itself and make it where you can start to use memory forensics in your own work. But yeah, this was my last slide. So I'm going to bounce out of the screen share and get PowerPoint off.
That was a great presentation, Andrew. I thought that covered a lot of the memory forensics. I think when we talk to different customers, depending on who you're talking about, they don't understand that. What do you mean by memory forensics? To them, forensics is a little difficult to understand. I noticed from Volatility 2 to 3, what are the real functionality jumps? Is there some new functionality that 2 didn't have, or is it just enhanced functionality from 2 to 3? In performance?
No, it has quite a few features specific to modern workflows. So things that people asked for many years in Volatility 2, but obviously in terms of like what people want, these are technologies that didn't even exist in 2008. So obviously we didn't include them or like have a design kind of like an code architecture to support them. So we were kind of in 2 modes. We were hacking stuff into Volatility 2 to make people happy for the moment, while simultaneously working on Volatility 3, which with Volatility 3, we got to design it from the ground up and really meet all of the needs people have. So one big thing is the flexible output format. Some people really like working on the command line, and that's fine. Other people just want to automate everything, right? So no matter what type of artifact you're looking at, which plugin you're running, we have the JSON output or JSON-L. We've talked to some of our friends in the industry who have really nice setups where they send memory samples through that nicely, richly formatted JSON data gets kicked out of volatility, and then that ends up in an auto processing queue, right? Something like, we all know the engines, right, that people use for correlations and queries and IOCs and so on. So that, like, supporting modern workflows, because like I said, it's very rare now to investigate 1 or 2 samples during a real IR. It's a dozen samples, it's 100 samples, it's however many samples, 1,000 plus samples, right? And so sitting on the command line 1 sample at a time is very tedious and really not efficient in any way. And so these companies, these people we talk to have really amazing, we try to get them to do conference talks on it, but obviously a lot of companies don't want that public or talked about, but they have really nice architectures where they set up to automate a lot of this work. Also the plugins, so that was another thing. We wanted to make it where people actually switch to Volatility 3. And so some of the plugins that detect malware techniques from, say, the last 2 years or so are only in Volatility 3. That's a similar talk topic I've been doing at a couple conferences, where these techniques, so malware knew what volatility was capable of. There's obviously not 100%, but there's some slight overlap with what EDRs will detect versus what memory forensics will detect. So malware was avoiding these detection techniques that had been in volatility for a long time. So we wanted to go back and study, okay, you're bypassing what we used to do. What can we do now to still catch you? And that led to a slew of new plugins, plugin updates, and now I'm very confident in the fact of whatever malware is out there, we're going to catch it. And then this, as I said, was a bunch of conference talks. So last year at DEF CON, I spoke on EDR evading malware. That was like the hot topic at the moment, because ransomware is still big, right? And so previously, EDR evasion was just your cream of the crop, your really good APT groups. And unless you're targeted by one of those for espionage or whatever reason, you weren't going to see EDR evasion. But then we saw this pattern where literally every ransomware group out there started doing EDR evasion because they want their payloads to run, and many organizations have EDR or something like it. And so once it gets to where every mom and pop shop is going to get hit with EDR evading ransomware, we're like, okay, we need to really focus on that. And so that led to a big DEF CON talk, led to 5 or 6 new volatility plugins that are only in Volatility 3. And it tells you right away if you have that type of activity going on, because that's obviously a problem, right? You think your EDR is going, one of the main benefits of EDR is the telemetry, right? And the ability to block things. And so the first thing EDR evading malware does is make it where you get 0 telemetry and 0 data off that system. And so we wanted to be able to detect that. And that's just one example. Process hollowing has always been popular, but there's it has a couple dozen variants, right? There's a lot of ways to do it. Some of them were made to specifically bypass techniques that have been caught before. And so we updated all of that. So yeah, we're pretty happy now. We spent probably 12 to 18 months just deep diving malware as far as you can deep dive in, and keeping notes during our own investigations. And like I said, the vast majority of the stuff we cover ends up in a talk somewhere, like a blog post or something. And then we try to encapsulate in a plugin. So yeah, it's the capabilities you have across Windows, Linux, analysis is much deeper with Volatility 3.
That's awesome. I love shell bags. That was one of my favorite in the volatility. But tell me this, can you use volatility in an enterprise without an EDR just to massively collect? Like 20 machines, I need to pull their forensics, point them out, and hit go, and then it would collect? Or what do I do?
Volatility only does the analysis part. So you would need to acquire the data in a different way. But yeah, once you have valid memory samples off of the systems you want to investigate, then you could automate volatility to just basically tell you if they have malware or not.
So I could just say once a night at midnight, dump your memory, dump it over to this NAS, and then run volatility. And if something has changed or something, so you can automate in that kind of manner?
Yes, and a lot of places do that. So like I said, we work with customers at Velocity to make basically that work. We have friends who have set up their own rigs for it. One of our friends, it's been some years, but he would talk a lot about how he was at a place that ran their own ESX servers, and they had a huge farm, not like 1 or 2 ESX servers, and they had a bunch of virtual machines inside of there. So he had automation where from the host, he was able to direct memory captures off of all those guests. He was doing it every night, right? It was automated. He'd get memory captures off the guest. He would run volatility against it. He had some alerts set up because some plugins produce no output if there's no malware, and the only time they produce output is if there's malware. So those are good ones to like automate around. But he was in this place. I mean, you can think how for places who do what you're talking about, you can think of how amazing advantage they have there, right? Because they're seeing within 24 hours if memory-only malware is present. They have, and then the other great thing they have is we talked about when you have memory-only malware, if the attackers clean it up or the machine reboots, it's gone. So imagine if it's a week later and you get a notification from the FBI or some provider that's like, hey, we're seeing weird activity off your network. It originated this date and time. If you have those captures of the important files off a disk and memory going back, you have a very temporal capture that tells you exactly what was happening then. And so given how cheap internal storage is, given how relatively cheap long-term storage is in the cloud, if you use some of the ones that are slower to read from, right, like Glacier and so on, but the whole point is you hopefully aren't reading from them very often. Yeah, we have customers that we work with directly. We have friends tell us lots of stories of basically daily or more memory captures off of critical systems with a bunch of automation around it to find badness. So
That's awesome. I think that's great. I think it's definitely one of the tools that is the go-to for everybody. Now, I saw this presentation at one of the security conferences too, that all the Copilot logs and ChatGPT are all visible in memory, and that you could just view through all the logs are just there clearing memory.
yeah, there's a lot going on with that. So it really goes back to, as I mentioned before, where if you can see it on your screen, it's in plain text. So you also have to think kind of from a programmatic standpoint, if ChatGPT is writing logs or reading its own database, or Copilot, or really any application is reading and writing a file, that is going to be clear text, right? Where the encryption happens in the vast majority of cases is on the file system. So your application has access to the clear text data. It writes it out to disk, and then let's just say we're on Windows, BitLocker is going to encrypt it before it goes on the physical media. So yes, in memory, you're going to have all of that clear text information just accessible. And this is what leads into where, like I said, people think, oh, I'll do private browsing and use that to visit like some internal portal at my company, and that's where I'm going to steal the data from. And then you get the memory, and they can close the browser, right? Completely close the browser after, but that data is going to hang out in memory. So even data from applications that have terminated are going to hang out in free memory, just like when you delete a file off a disk, it sits in the free space on disk. And so we have plugins and techniques we teach people to specifically hone in on that data, and it gives you access to, like I said, it can be encrypted on disk, it can be encrypted on the network, it doesn't matter. It's going to be plain text in memory, and you can go back and recover it. And you can imagine with like chat applications that are end-to-end encrypted and so on, a lot of times memory is the only place that has a plain text or a decrypted version of it. So
what about Signal? I've been talking about Signal lately. Those are encrypted messages, but that's transport level. Is that encrypted in memory?
no, because it's the same. Like if you use Signal for desktop, which I do, right? Like that's the main thing I communicate with a lot of for a lot of people. I'm seeing those messages in plain text, and so that means it's plain text in memory. And I usually have Signal running, but for example, I closed it before I joined the call, right? Just so like notifications might not pop up through Do Not Disturb and such. Like those conversations I had earlier, my laptop hasn't rebooted. It's not like I'm using 100% of RAM to just run Teams and PowerPoint. So that free memory that's not being used for something actively, very likely the Signal conversation, like fragments or the entire conversations that I was having, are in memory. And it's funny, like I said, we have law enforcement people have told us since the beginning of Volatility, like, we don't care about your malware plugins. We don't, they don't care, right? They just want, there's like an encrypted zip file or there's an encrypted thumb drive. They want the password, and they can get that out of memory. A really good example of this, and there's been CTFs sort of challenges around it, is the other thing to realize is, and sort of another example we tell people, is think of memory as like a key logger, right? So let's say you have your thumb drive or your larger external drive, or maybe what people will do, it's still pretty common, is have zip files on the hard drive, and those are separately encrypted, right? So you go to type in the password to decrypt those, that lives in memory. So then let's say you get your door kicked down and the police get a memory sample of your system, but the thumb drive wasn't plugged in at the moment. So they have this thumb drive, they know it very likely has data they want to get to, but let's say you use a strong password and they can't just throw like a video card at it. What they can do instead, and it's very common, is take that memory capture, run the strings utility over it. So it's going to get all the human readable strings, which includes your password. So now instead of using just a generic dictionary attack where you hope someone used like an English word or a bad password, the dictionary you're building of potential passwords to attack that encryption with is basically everything that person typed in on the keyboard. And so you're using their own typing against them. Where this gets really bad is things like browser passwords, where you have all your passwords saved in the browser, or you have password managers. Many of those, as soon as you unlock the database, put all the passwords from that database plain text in memory. So now you essentially have every password you've ever used in memory, which is fine on the network, right? Someone snooping the network won't see them. But if you get the memory capture, now you have their whole password set being used against them in those types of attacks where you want to break encryption. And so very popular in like law enforcement and similar type operations. Yeah.
You know what it reminds me of is like a pad of paper, I guess, where somebody wrote data and they took the page and you're using the pen to highlight the impressions on the page below it. Is that sort of the same
I mean,
concept?
it's, yeah, it is, because you think that like your password manager helps you generate passwords that are truly strong, right? So they're not going to be
Right.
brute force if that website or web service gets compromised, things like that. But once it's in memory, it's in plain text. And so you're having all of that in plain text in memory. And so scraping that out of memory becomes very necessary. And like I said, I mentioned the law enforcement angle a few times, but it's also those insider threats, right? So we have friends who are on internal, whatever you might call them, like DLP teams, insider threat teams. The name kind of changes, but the idea is if you're at a big enough company, someone's going to go rogue at some point, try to steal data. And if you have someone who's mildly technical, it's always bad if it's like an IT person goes rogue, because they're kind of a bar above like the average person. They will have encrypted thumb drives and zips and virtual disk and all these things, but you can use memory forensics against them to recover that data back. And so it gets used in a lot of contexts besides just finding malware.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've in some of those insider threats that you see where it really is useful when you're doing memory forensics. When it's ransomware, it's really finding patient zero and how did this occur? And then in the enterprises, a lot of times we're not doing memory capture. We do a quarantine and then we smash and re-image once we found out what it is. Because we don't have time to look at every time a machine gets hit. Well, now, if some data went out or it was serious, but every time someone gets hit, we just want to re-image it, get it back up and running. We don't have as big an appetite for long investigations like that. Leah would, or in law enforcement, right? We need to be able to determine what happened, where did it come in, how do we fix that, how do we get the thing back up and running, and then we got another ticket to have to deal with.
Yeah, that the initial motivator to investigate will definitely change that. And it depends on the environment, right? A lot of places that we help protect are very heavily targeted. And so they really need to chase down every lead, anytime someone's in their network, they really need to root cause it all the way to the end. Depending on, as you said before, your EDRs and your telemetry, if it's a different type organization, and they can see someone just fell for like a silly email or some sort of service that was some malware that wasn't as serious just through telemetry. But yeah, in a lot of the places we work, they have to chase down every lead just because of what it could be. Yeah.
Oh, it depends on a lot of places. Yeah. I was at New Orleans Public Schools as a contractor for a while, and the head network guy wanted to post everybody's password on the internet. Now this was 16, right? Yeah, just seeing some of those practices, you never even think about doing that today. Back then, that was like common. Hey, we don't want you to have a password problem, so we're just going to make everyone's password the same. What?
Yeah, my son's school, the first day of school, their passwords were all their like 4-digit student ID. So it's kind of a race. Like, are you going to access your account before your friend who can read the number off your school ID, and then you have access to everything? And
Yeah.
then I'm like, and then I'm thinking like teachers have the same badge. Do they all actually change their password and things? So yeah,
Probably not.
remnants of that still happens where I guess it's convenient.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, his daughter, I think she's like in the 3rd grade or something, like 4th grade. And apparently she learned the password pin for the meals, like being able to scan for your meals and be able to track your meals. And this boy was picking on her, and she changed his profile to some kind of princess image. So every time he scanned, she like knew the code for the back end machine and changed his profile. So he's like a princess every time. And he's getting all mad that this princess image is showing him. He goes, I don't know whether to be upset with her or be so proud of her at the same time. I could call from the school that she illegally accessed a computer in order to be able to do this. I mean, so it's always those fun kid stories. Now, Andrew, we're running late, and it's coming towards the end of the show, and I could keep talking to you for hours. That was a great presentation on memory forensics and what to expect in the enterprise. Where can we learn more about what you're doing and your company and so forth? Which was website? No.
Yeah, so on the open source side, the link that I had to the blog post announcing Volatility 3 is every detail you'd want to know about the changes and a lot of the cool new features and documentation and examples. On the commercial side, Volatility is still going very strong. We've been cited recently on some very interesting intrusions. We get to work some of the most some of the most targeted places there are. And we try to release as much of that as we can, obviously anonymized and so on. And we'll have a big presence out in Vegas if people want to find us there. We like talking to Volatility users, community members. So myself and Dave LaSalle will be doing a demo at Black Hat Arsenal. So that is a really cool service or kind of event that Black Hat runs where developers of open source tools can get like basically a booth with a TV and a laptop, and you get to show off your tool. And we've done it before. You get like hundreds of people walking through over the course of an hour or two. So if you want to see us live at Black Hat, we'll be there. At DEF CON, we'll be putting on the workshop. DEF CON workshops are very highly coveted, so they fill up in about 2 seconds. So make sure you refresh the browser fast if you want to do that. But that will be very technical. If you want to have 4 hours with us, learn how to use Volatility to detect very sophisticated malware, try to get into our DEF CON workshop. And then at B-Sides Las Vegas, one of my coworkers, David, will be presenting his latest research as well. So Volatility managed to cover all 3 of the big events with pretty cool presentations. So let us know. Like I said, we spend most of our time meeting community members, hanging out with people. So we're very social that way. Just hit us up on LinkedIn, or the blog post will have the link to our Slack, and then you can message us there as well.
That's awesome, Andrew. Yeah, hopefully I'll be out Black Hat and DEF CON this year. I'm not confirmed just yet. I'm trying to get there, but maybe I'll meet you out there. For everybody else who's listening, we want to thank Andrew for coming on board. Please hit that comment, subscribe, try to grow our membership, and hopefully I'll get to see everybody soon. So stay secure, and talk to you everybody soon.
Thank you.